Now, in the work that I do with people, there's two basic ideas. There's a lot, there's five really, but there's two that are relevant here. The first one is the concept of your unique story print. And this is your personal history. This is, in fact, even before you were born, includes your ancestry, your roots. There's literally no human being on the planet that has your unique story print. And most people are not connected to that. They don't actually remember. So the first phase I go through with people is this discovery process, actually getting in touch with your unique story print. Now, the goal is to turn that into what I call your story mark. Your story print's like a fingerprint, your story mark's like a trademark. This is what you get known for. This is your personal brand. And there's a way of taking these raw materials from your personal life and then kind of crafting them and shaping them into a story mark. Now, I want to show you on the next slide something I've never taught outside of my private workshops or my one-on-one coaching, and that is what this story mark really consists of. So we take this idea of your personal brand. What do I mean? What is the point, right? What are we talking about? You hear this bandied around all the time. Well, I'm going to make this really practical for you. Your personal brand, what I call your story mark, is really composed of these two core areas. Your signature stories and soundbites, that's one. And then your story-driven social content. Signature stories and soundbites. When we talk about your personal brand, what we are referring to here are some ways of talking about who you are, the work you do, etc., that you will have relatively fixed, but you might have the 5-second version, the 30-second version, the 1-minute version, and you can mix and match these things. But basically, there are 6. Who I am, what I do, why I started, what I stand for, what I saw, and what I see. What I saw is stories about the past. What I see are stories about the present and the future. So these 6 core components, if you were working with me one-on-one, we'd spend quite some time to nail this down so you could talk easily to anybody in any situation about who you are, what you do, why you started. You would mix these things in. I would show you how to actually do that so you were comfortable answering the question, so what do you do? And you'd be able to do that. So signature stories and soundbites. The soundbites are the kind of messages. The stories are the little bit longer kind of backstory version of that. But you also need something else. It's not enough to just have that, although your website is probably not as compelling as it could be if this is not nailed down, if this isn't sharp, if your messaging isn't dialed in, if these signature stories and soundbites aren't showing up in your headline, your about page, the way you describe your services, and in the articles you might write, whatever, right? That has to be crisp and sharp. But then there's the question of where the actual attention and engagement comes from. It's not that. It's from the next pillar, which is the story-driven social content. And this is what I want to talk about in some depth here. And this is where your smartphone comes into play, because you can do all this from your phone without a lot of fancy stuff. So story-driven social content, the things you make and share, preferably on a daily basis, but hopefully at least on a weekly basis, or, for the love of God, at least once a month. Whatever you're going to do, you got to be making some stuff and putting it out. And right now, as I'm seeing it, I put up 4 primary social platforms: Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, and LinkedIn. But honestly, pick 2, whatever your favorite things are. I mean, Facebook and Instagram are kind of where it's at, but LinkedIn has been coming up strong. The number of users on LinkedIn, I don't know if you've been paying attention to this. LinkedIn was just a post your resume online site not that long ago. But in the last 4 years, the user base has doubled to now 500 million active users. And with LinkedIn video and the ability to write articles and put in essentially blog posts that you create on the LinkedIn platform with LinkedIn Pulse, that's really important to think about for story-driven content. And all of those little bubbles there are just kind of the way this stuff percolates around. We need to be able to create and put out, little pieces of content. Some of them will get larger over time as they get traction and engagement. Others of them will fade away. But this is something I really want you to wrap your head around. Your personal brand equals the signature stories and soundbites that you are known for, the things that you'd say kind of the same way most of the times that you say them, and all of the story-driven content that is a more natural human reflection of your brand. Okay, it's personality driven. And there's another key concept here. You probably already know this, but I want to hammer this home. Mobile is the new word of mouth. This is where everyone's attention is now. This screen and the apps on this screen are where we are consuming the vast majority of content. It's where people are spending on average 5 to 6 hours a day. And I'm not the only person to point this out. Lots of people have pointed this out. But not everyone's actually shifted their behavior as creators and business owners to fit that realization. We all know it, but we're not always doing anything about it, right? So we need to find ways of creating content that allow other people to engage with us where they're looking, right? Mobile is the new word of mouth. So with that being said, then the real question comes down to something super practical, right? How do you organize your time? How do you know what to make and where to put it? And so one of the things that I teach in my private workshops is this next slide. And we'll spend some time on this. And this is, I want to also give people a chance to download this. You may not be able to see all of this on the screen. I don't know. So this is what I call the 5x5 matrix. And basically to understand how this works, remember what we're doing. We're creating compelling, story-driven social content. We need to put those bubbles out in ways that people will bump into them, like them, share them, and comment on them, whatever, right? We need to create compelling stuff. And it can't just be about us, right? That's where we started this conversation. It can't just be navel gazing. It can't just be, always your personal history. Sometimes that's great, but you can't do that all the time. So what do? Well, I came up with this simple grid. There are 5 topic areas and 5 story types. 5 topics, 5 types. And what's really cool about this is you can print it out and you can say, let's use it like a weekly plan. You could say, all right, this week I'm going to make 2 things, right? Start where you are. And you pick one type and you pick one topic. Actually, not just a topic. As I walk through them, you'll see what I mean here. You want to get really specific within the topic because these topics are categories. So the first is the types. These are kind of easy and obvious. Photos. You know what? A single picture can tell a story, right? They say that picture's worth 1,000 words, and most of the stories you tell are shorter than 1,000 words. So yeah, you got a story to work with there if you set it up right. The next one, moving down the story types, is long form text. What do I mean by that? Well, it could be a long caption that goes with a photo, 3-4 paragraphs. Could be a blog post. Could be an article you write and guest blog on some other site. You can actually blog very effectively now in your Instagram feed if writing long form captions along with your photos. You can do this on Facebook. You can do this on LinkedIn. So depending on what platform, you obviously can do it on your own site, right? WordPress, Squarespace, whatever. So writing long form text-based stories. The next type is unique to Facebook, Instagram, and Snapchat. Snapchat invented this concept and everyone else stole it and did it better. Well, at least Instagram did it better. That's the idea of 24-hour stories. And you're probably all familiar with this, so sorry, this is a little remedial. But if you're not, 24-hour story is simply a 24-hour cycle. Whatever element you post, either a photo or a video, will stay there for 24 hours and then disappear. And if you understand how that works, you can actually create sequences, little story sequences, 15 seconds at a time, for example, on Instagram. And you can mix and match photos. You can write on the photo. You can get creative with your drawing and know that those are going to rotate off every 24 hours. And because that's a unique feature, you can do some interesting things with it. But so 24-hour stories, it's a combination of photos and video, and you can augment the photos, right? And then it's a rotating thing. The next story type is recorded video and audio. And this is where you sit down in advance, you press record, and then maybe you edit, right? You might just trim the beginning or the end. You might add a lower third on the video. You might actually get more involved with the editing and produce an episode of a vlog or something. But in any case, or a podcast would be an example of pre-recorded audio. And whether you're putting that on SoundCloud or whether you're actually using a podcast hosting platform, you're preparing some kind of audio or video content in advance, polishing it up the way you want, and then publishing it, right? Again, not rocket science here. We're just reviewing your options. The final one is, of course, live streams. You can live stream on Facebook. You can live stream on Instagram. I predict before long, you will be able to live stream on LinkedIn, but they're not doing that yet. With a live stream, you're not limited by the time like you are the 15 seconds, for example. And sometimes that could be good. Sometimes that could be bad. It all depends on if you have something to say. Now, these 5 types of stories can be mixed and matched, right? But what's really interesting is to think about the topics that you can use these 5 types to create content for, and then how you actually implement this, right? So I'm just starting by walking you through the tool, and then we'll talk about how you can actually use it. So let's talk about topics for a second. One major topic area is people. You're a person, so you're included in that, right? You could have stories about yourself. It could be stories about something happening right now in the present moment. It could be stories about something that happened this morning, last week, when I was in the 4th grade, my grandma, whatever. Personal history stories. Your personal stories can be told with photos, long-form text captions, 24-hour stories. If you come up with a little structure, maybe you write out a few notes and then you kind of put some clips together to do that. You could make a video, obviously. That video could be a slideshow of pictures from your past, whatever, right? Obviously, we're just talking about you personally and walking it through all of these different types. But it's not just you. There are other people. So, for example, you could tell the story of the other people in your building. You could interview somebody about their business, featuring them, getting them to tell the backstory. You could, when you're sharing photos from conferences you attend, right? That's a people photo story. Now, you're probably doing some of this already without realizing it. This is just a way to be a little more intentional, yes? A little more conscious, like knowing, oh, I want to make this, I want to make that. You could feature stories about clients or customers, people who you've worked with, who have gotten results from you. Now, remember, something I should have said earlier, a kind of overriding principle for all of this. My view is you want to be making the shows, not the commercials. Okay, so story-driven content, what do I even mean by that? Make the shows, not the commercials. In other words, you're making the stuff that's interesting to watch in its own right, like the TV show, not the commercial that interrupts the show to try to sell something. Because you follow this? So an overarching theme here is make the shows, not the commercials. So when you're telling stories about clients, it's not a thinly veiled sales pitch. It really is their story and the results they got, and that's it. Find ways to make that as compelling and interesting as possible. Another great example here for people would be, this doesn't apply necessarily to anybody in this community, but if somebody were a realtor, for example, I'm giving a talk to realtors tomorrow, find the most interesting people in the territory where you want to sell houses or commercial real estate and feature them on a weekly show, personality-based thing, right? Find the 94-year-old woman who's lived here since, before the Second World War and have her tell the story of the neighborhood. That gets into places, but we'll get to that next. So expand your ideas around the people you can feature to include, so there's yourself, there's your peers, right? There's past clients, there's present day clients, there's people in the area. Really think outside the box and you'll realize you could just go deep on the people column using all 5 story types and you'd have about 3 months or 30 years worth of stuff to make right there, right? Then places, obviously there's like behind the scenes stuff. Here I am in the studio about to film this, or here's my office, or I'm going to my favorite coffee shop, and maybe you're teaching something, but at the same time, you can feature the place. You can do walkthroughs. You can show people your favorite park. Whatever you're doing, remember that, in a weird way, this is kind of like reality TV. Obviously, it's got to be good. Can't just be like, so I'm walking around this neighborhood now. Oh, look, a trash can, and there's a wall. I mean, you have a little thought into it. Creativity really is a key variable in this equation. But think of ways to feature places. Now, here's where this gets really interesting. You don't have to only feature places from the present. You could tell stories about places from the past. Maybe you could write them. right? Or you could make a video about them. One of the clients who worked with me one-on-one a few months ago came when we were working through this model, having done that STORYPRINT series of exercises to get in touch with her personal history. We got to some practical applications. She came up with this amazing story about her grandfather's armchair. And she told the story as this kind of, her grandfather's armchair was this place of comfort. It was a place of learning. She sat on his lap. She listened to him talk. She then sat there by herself and read books when she would go back home, et cetera, et cetera. And now the grandfather's armchair sits in her office, and it connects her work in the present to this story from the past. She had never realized that that would be an interesting thing. It was amazing. It was like this totally compelling story featuring the armchair as the main kind of character, the place, the thing where this stuff had happened. Okay, so again, if you were to think about places, you could tell stories with photos, with video. You could go back to your high school, whatever. I mean, I don't know if they let you do that anymore, but I don't know if you'd want to. I don't think I would. But bottom line is, right, places can have character, and that can help create compelling content. Other people's businesses is another example. The coffee shop. And if you combine people and places, now you've got an interview with your favorite barista and also a little tour of the shop and why you love this place, and et cetera. You've got to map these things onto your core intention, which is what? Connect with your audience. Have them compelled by the way you see the world, by what you're doing. Side note, before I get to the other three topics, sometimes people realize, I'm not doing very much. I'm not that interesting. I could be, I'm just not. One of the really crazy, fun, cool things about storytelling is once you start trying to tell better stories, you kind of have to start living a better life. And once you start living a better life, you've got better stories to tell. And then those stories create new opportunities, which gives you a better life to live. And then there's this circular relationship, telling better stories, living a better life. Living a more unapologetic life, a more bold and engaging and out there kind of a life. Let the storytelling imperative go to work on you, and you'll be stretched by it. It'll change how you see yourself and the world. But then when you share that material, it'll change the way others see themselves and the world. That's the whole point. We're not just talking about how to fill your Facebook feed. We're actually talking about how to stretch and grow and be more interesting and be more engaged, and then share that in a way that challenges others to be more interesting and be more engaged. It's kind of how it always works, right? Another topic, process. This is a really interesting one, and I think this poses some useful challenges for people whose process is sort of invisible, right? Coaches, for example, how do they do their work? What's their process? Well, they talk to somebody on the phone or in person. Can you show that? Well, not necessarily. Maybe you could show part of your side of it. Maybe you could get creative with how you do that. But I think that understanding that the more we can show our process, maybe you can't show an actual client call, but you have a sequence of steps you take most clients through, and you can make a picture or a diagram that shows those steps. Or you can tell the story of a client. If you need to change their name, you can do that. It's fine. You can say, Mary's not her real name, but this is what we did. We show your work, show the process. If you can show, there's probably a lot of things. Again, once you get out more, start engaging more, then that's also part of the process. If a great example of this at a much higher scale is what Gary Vaynerchuk's been doing for quite some time now. I don't know, what is it, 18 months? I forget when he started with Daily V, but basically the idea of showing how he works. He goes around, he goes on talks, he's on planes, he's in meetings, he's in a car, he's in a staff meeting, he's meeting with this person. There's some fascinating glimpses. Think what you will about him as a persona, that's fine, but there's some fascinating attempts there to show a process. And believe me, he's working with clients. He can't show a lot of their meetings and things like that. So finding ways to work around that, make it work. Show your work. People want to know and understand what you do. And if they see it, they get it, at least better than they did before. Okay. Problem. What do I mean here? Well, there's all kinds of problems. You could say, I needed a P word, but you could put challenge, obstacle, anything. This could be your own. This could be somebody else's. This is where you're telling the truth about a challenge or an issue or a problem that you're facing, or that a client is facing, or that you faced in the past. This is where you can really tell stories that will intersect with the silent stories people are telling themselves about themselves, the ones that are going to keep them from hiring you unless they interrupt that narrative. So, for example, I was talking a few months ago with a relationship coach. And in our conversation, I was asking her some questions, was listening, trying to learn more about how she was growing her business and what she was struggling with to get more leads and get more clients. And what we realized in this conversation was the very same stories that her potential clients are telling themselves that are keeping them from getting a date or a relationship that they really want are also keeping them from hiring her. Stories about intimacy, about self-worth, about, how do I even want to put myself out there? Is it worth it? For people to hire her, they'd have to alter that story. So what she started doing was talking about that openly and actually saying, listen, and she would use pseudonyms and things, as you have to do sometimes. But basically, when she started sharing this in a way and being quite direct about it, she started getting calls. We're like, oh my God, it was like you were in my head. How did you know? And I realized how silly that was. Of course, if I want, a thriving relationship, if I want to find my soulmate, whatever the framework was, right, then I have to take this first step. And what she did was she started to narrate how that first step was the first breakthrough, right? You want this, ideal outcome, but you've got to find the way to take the first step. Calling me can be that first step. It's safe. It's confidential. You won't have to work with me. We can have a conversation to explore your situation, however she did it, right? So she began to show people the path, not only the problem, but the pathway they'd need to take. I would put path on here, but then I would have 6x5, which is weird. Show people or tell them, however you do it, so that they can begin to imagine the steps they need to go down on their journey. I'm being a little abstract just in the interest of time, but show people the steps that happen when they take an action and show them how it turns out. Think about the problem people have and the path they can follow to get out of it. And then the last one, promise, is really about creating stories that are compelling visions of the future. This is how things can turn out. This is the desired goal. So what would a promise-based story look like? Well, here's another silly example. If you were to take the 24-hour story type and map it to the promise, remember, now we could start going and mixing and matching and creating some really interesting combinations. What would that look like? Well, imagine for a second a scavenger hunt. Right? You know that there's something you're trying to accomplish. The process of getting there is a little bit zany and fun, but the promise is, winning this whatever, right? Whatever the prize is. You could use the 24-hour story framework to show 15-second or still image snippets of that process on the way to that promise. In other words, you're bringing people into that experience with you. So 5 story topics, 5 story types. And again, here's how I would use this if I were you. So you'll be able to download this from a link below and print it out and just maybe print out a bunch of them and write, this week beginning, whatever, write that at the top. And then just pick a couple of squares and stretch yourself to think of something. What could you do that shows your process in a live stream this week, right? What could you do that talks about a place that was significant in some way in a series of photos, right? Or in a pre-recorded video, which takes a little more time than all the others, but can sometimes end up being, the best result. You just kind of need to choose how to approach that. And again, remember, the framework for all this is storytelling with your smartphone. You can do every single thing on this matrix with your phone. Sure, if you want to get a little external mic and plug it in so your videos sound a little bit better, great. Get the Rode SmartLav Plus or something, right? If you want to get a little external lens or a little grip or something, get some better lighting, fine. You can do those things, but you don't have to. You can start right now with the device in your pocket, pick one of these squares and go make something. Share it on the platforms you're currently using or the ones you want to build up more of an audience on. If you're not doing anything, start with Facebook and maybe LinkedIn, actually, or Instagram. Solid. Again, one of my clients is crushing it selling online courses with just her Instagram. And she's not doing a lot of active stuff, but she's using very story-driven approaches, focusing on her clients' goals, and creating stories, videos, and those 24-hour stories. Creating photos, videos, and those 24-hour stories that are engaging her audience in really compelling ways. So we can get even more granular and talk about different apps and different techniques and things. But Melissa says this is a great tool to spark creativity and challenge one to do more. Yes, exactly. Bottom line is this: you can't do everything tomorrow, but if you begin to make this a practice, if you picked one square a week or two, and you thought, what's one person? That guy Joey at the auto shop, and you write it in there, right? One piece of process. Well, I think this week I'm going to try to show myself setting up my Facebook ads account. I mean, I don't know what it's got. At some level, it's got to be you figuring out what you're doing or what you could be doing, and then showing it. Just show it the way that it is. You don't have to be fancy. You'll get better. Your photos will get better. Your captions and kind of hashtagging and all that stuff will get better. Just get started. Like literally, you have never had as much high power broadcasting equipment as you do in your pocket right now. And it doesn't even have to be the new phone. I mean, the one you have right now is the one to start with. I mean, look, we used to do live remote broadcasts via satellite with the radio station when I was growing up, but it required a truck with like $200,000 worth of gear and 3 engineers and 5 hours to set up. Right now, you can pull this thing out, and I don't know about yours, but like mine, I double click the thing and it goes straight to the camera, and I can hit go. Yeah. Right, and HD everything, like it's amazing. We're not using this stuff nearly at the level that we could. And it's probably worth ending by talking a little bit about why not. And everything that I just said will be meaningless, useless. It'll just be another good idea unless you, everyone, personally for yourself, ask yourself the honest question, why am I not already doing this? And pay attention to the answers. Like really look and be compassionate and take them seriously. And it's going to be different for everybody, right? But like, well, I'm not doing this because I think I need to lose 20 pounds first, right? I'm not doing this because I don't like my hair or I think I'm not good on camera. I'm not doing this because I don't have any ideas. Whatever your things are. And then you got to ask yourself, okay, great, I get it. That's why I'm not doing it. I appreciate that. Makes sense. If my goal is staying small and comfortable, those reasons running my life is a perfect fit. You don't have to change anything. But if your goal is to have an impact, if your goal is to touch other people's lives, you have to ask yourself, am I going to have those stories I'm telling myself about myself be the reason why I never did this other thing? Or am I going to pat myself on the back, take a shot of vodka, whatever you need to do to get yourself in the frame of mind and go for it? It gets easier. The first is always the worst. You don't have to like it. It's not for you, right? And you might be surprised. The more authentic, the more real, the more unvarnished your story-driven content is, your pictures, your captions, your all that stuff, the more people are going to like it. We're now like approaching reality TV 3.0, and it's all happening on your phone. And if you pay attention to other people, it ain't all polished. And plenty of folks that you love and that you get super motivated by and that give you ideas that help you make a lot of money or that whatever don't look great. And every single time they turn on the camera, they have to deal with themselves about it. It doesn't always get easier in that regard, the skills get easier. Your creative chops will get better. The more you practice, the more ideas you'll have. That's just how it works. But I remember reading somewhere that Peter Fonda, fantastic actor, would throw up before every single performance for his entire career. So if that's your thing, then just like, all right, I got to go do my throw up now, and then I'm coming back because I am not going to not do this, right? So have a little talk with yourself. Ask yourself why you're not already doing this as much as you want to. And then ask yourself if you want those reasons to run the rest of your life, or if you want to try it. And if you want to try it, pick one square. Pick one thing and then go make it.